Hello and welcome to part 4 of Understanding the Native American Experience. So on today's video, we're going to look at the last document provided for your assignment, which is from President James Monroe on Indian removal in 1825, Message to Congress. Now, as you'll notice, this date is before the Indian Removal Act of 1830 was passed. And so we're looking at kind of like a precursor to what happened. So I've opened up the message, and just as before, I'm going to be using the same chart that I've been using, and I'm going to add my source, my bib, go back to here, click to copy. And again, I'm using the MyBib Chrome extension. If you're interested in creating sources in a very quick and easy way, then MyBib is a great tool for that purpose. Now, how do I get rid of this? We don't want that. Thank you, UC Santa Barbara. So, James Monroe, the 5th president of the U.S., and you'll notice that this was his last year in office. So this was right before Andrew Jackson was elected as the new president. To the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States, being deeply impressed with the opinion that the removal of the Indian tribes from the lands which they now occupy within the limits of the several states and territories to the country lying westward and northward thereof, within our acknowledged boundaries, is of very high importance to our Union, and may be accomplished on conditions and in a manner to promote the interest and happiness of those tribes. The attention of the government has been long drawn with great solicitude to the object. So what he's saying is that it is of high importance to the country to move the Native Americans out of their lands into better places, in his opinion, and that they can do so in a way that promotes the interest and happiness of those tribes. So what we're trying to do here is to move the Native Americans, but we're going to do it in a way that is good for them too. So Monroe suggests that the U.S. can relocate the native tribes in a way that is also conducive to their happiness, safety, and security. So he's saying we could do this in a way that doesn't hurt anybody. The attention of the For the removal of the tribes within the limits of the state of Georgia, the motive has been peculiarly strong, arising from the compact with the state whereby the United States are bound to extinguish the Indian title to the lands within it whenever it may be done peacefully and on reasonable conditions. So it's saying that we have the authority to strip away their ownership of these lands if we can do it peacefully and reasonably, which the idea of stripping people from their lands is neither peaceful nor reasonable by nature, but that's besides the point for now. So we have the authority to strip the ownership away from Native Americans if we can do so peacefully and with reasonable conditions. That's what he is saying to his people. Like, hey, don't worry. This suggestion is going to be peaceful and reasonable for the Native Americans. We're doing this in a way for our happiness, but it's also for their happiness. We're not hurting anyone. Right? In the fulfillment of this compact, I have thought that the United States should act with a generous spirit, that they should omit nothing which should comport with a liberal construction of the instrument, and likewise be in accordance with the just rights of those tribes. So we have to do it in a way that's good for those tribes, that provides for their rights. From the view which I have taken of the subject, I am satisfied that in the discharge of these important duties in regards to both the parties alluded to, the United States will have to encounter no conflicting interests with either. So he's saying, from what I've seen, everyone's going to be happy with these arrangements. I'm satisfied that everyone is going to be happy with these arrangements, and there are not going to be any conflicts of interest. On the contrary, that the removal of the tribes from the territory which they now inhabit to that which was designated in the message at the commencement of the session, which would accomplish the object for Georgia under a well-digested plan for their government and civilization, which should be agreeable to themselves, would not only shield them from impending ruin, but promote their welfare and happiness. So he is saying that they have created some kind of plan, and if they follow this plan, then they are going to avoid ruin. They're going to avoid some bad things that are going to happen if they stay in place. If they follow the plans we created, it will help them avoid, and they say that this is impending ruin, like this ruin is going to happen. If you stay where you're at, it will be bad for you. And it's going to promote their welfare and happiness. So he's trying to convince his audience that this is going to be good for everybody. Georgia's going to be happy. The Native Americans are going to be happy. It will be fine. Just go through with it and fulfill this plan and everybody will be happy. Experience has clearly demonstrated that in their present state, it is impossible to incorporate them in such masses in any form whatever into our system. So we can't incorporate so many people into our system. We don't have the capacity. It is also demonstrated with equal certainty that without a timely anticipation of and provision against the dangers to which they are exposed, under causes which it will be difficult, if not impossible, to control, their degradation and extermination will be inevitable. So he says that if we do not figure this out, then they are doomed to have their entire people be extinguished or exterminated. So if we don't quickly move them somewhere else, they will be exposed to things that will cause their people to die and eventually for their tribe to become extinct. Basically is what he's saying. Like, your tribe is going to die out if you stay where you're at because you're going to be exposed to danger. The great object to be accomplished is the removal of these tribes to the territory designated The great object to be accomplished is the removal of these tribes to the territory designated on conditions which shall be satisfactory to themselves and honorable to the United States. So the conditions we carry out are going to be honorable to us. They're not going to be bad. We're not hurting anyone. They'll be satisfied with how it's handled. This can be done only by conveying to each tribe a good title to an adequate portion of land to which it may consent to remove, and by providing for it there a system of internal government which shall protect their property from invasion, and, by the regular progress of improvement and civilization, prevent that degeneracy which has generally marked the transition from the one to the other state. So he's saying we need to give them an adequate piece of land, and they need to be able to consent to moving there. We need to provide an adequate piece of land to them, and we should help them establish an internal government to protect them from invasion. To help them become more civilized and improved. So he basically is trying to control them, and he wants to make them more civilized by his view, which we have to kind of question that. I transmit herewith a report from the Secretary of War, which presents the best estimate which can be formed, from the documents in that department, of the number of Indians within our states and territories, and the amount of lands held by the several tribes within each, of the state of the country lying northward and westward thereof, with our acknowledged boundaries, of the parts to which the Indian title has already been extinguished, and of the conditions on which other parts, in an amount which may be adequate to the object contemplated, may be obtained. By this report, it appears that the Indian title has already been extinguished to extensive tracts in that quarter, and that other portions may be acquired to the extent desired on very moderate conditions. Satisfied I also am that the removal proposed is not only practical, but that the advantages attending to it, the Indians, may be made so apparent to them that all the tribes, even those most opposed, may be induced to accede to it at no very distant day. He's saying, like, that the people are going to see that there are so many advantages to moving that they're not even going to disagree. They're going to be like, all right, that sounds good, let's move. The digest of such a government, with the consent of the Indians, which should be endowed with sufficient power to meet all the objects contemplated, to connect the several tribes together in a bond of amity and preserve order in each, to prevent intrusions on their property, to teach them by regular instruction the arts of civilized life and make them a civilized people, is an object of very high importance. It is the powerful consideration which we have to offer to these tribes as an inducement to relinquish the lands on which they now reside, and to remove to those which are designated. So he's saying it's within our best interest to help the tribes be friendly with one another and to teach them how to behave like civilized people. And what he means by this is to behave like how his people behave. Which, it is the powerful consideration which we have to offer to these tribes as an inducement to relinquish the land. Okay. It is not doubted that this arrangement will present considerations of sufficient force to surmount all their prejudice in favor of the soil of their nativity, however strong they may be. Their elders have sufficient intelligence to discern the certain progress of events in the present train, and sufficient virtue by yielding to momentary sacrifices to protect their families and posterity from inevitable destruction. They will also perceive that they may thus attain an elevation to which, as communities, they could not otherwise aspire. So he's saying their elders are very wise, and they know it's for their best interest to do what we're saying. And know that if they sacrifice now, their families will be prosperous and will avoid destruction. They will also improve their social standing that they could not otherwise improve. So he's saying it's going to be so good for them. They're going to love it. To the United States, the proposed arrangement offers many important advantages in addition to those which have already been enumerated. By the establishment of such a government over these tribes with their consent, we become in reality their benefactors. So he wants to put his own government in each of these tribes so that they can control what happens there. The relation of conflicting interests has heretofore existed between them and our frontier settlements will cease. There will be no more wars between them and the United States. Adopting such a government, their movement will be in harmony with us, and its good effect be felt throughout the whole extent of our territory to the Pacific. It may fairly be presumed that, through the agency of such a government, the condition of all the tribes inhabiting the vast region may be essentially improved, that permanent peace may be preserved with them, and our commerce be much extended. So he's saying, if they adopt the government that we give them, then they will be happy, they will be prosperous, there will be no more war. And their lives will be improved. With a view to this important object, I recommend it to Congress to adopt, by solemn declaration, certain fundamental principles in accord with those above suggested, as the basis of such arrangements as may be entered into with several tribes, to the strict observance of which the faith of the nation shall be pledged. I recommend it also to Congress to provide by law for the appointment of a suitable number of commissioners who shall, under the direction of the President, be authorized to visit and explain to the several tribes the objects of the government, and to make with them, according to their instructions, such arrangements as best be calculated to carry those objects into effect. So we should be allowed to go into these tribes and help them understand the government and their functions within the tribe. A negotiation is now depending with the Creek Nation for the cession of lands held by it within the limits of Georgia, and with a reasonable prospect of success. It is presumed, however, that the result will not be known during the present session of Congress. To give effect to this negotiation and to the negotiations which it is proposed to hold with all the other tribes within the limits of the several states and territories, on the principles and for the purposes stated, it is recommended that an adequate appropriation be now made by Congress. So he's recognizing that his presidency is coming to an end, and he's recommending that they go forth with his ideas on how to treat the Native Americans. So now we've gone through all of the different parts. In the next video, we will wrap it up, and I will show you how to proceed with all of this knowledge and how to synthesize these materials into one thing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in our last video on this topic.